Welcome to Now UTOKing, which is a new series of videos where we offer short explanations of key terms in the UTOK framework. Today, we're talking about the word psyche. Now, perhaps more than any other word in the series, psyche achieves a unique definition in the context of UTOK. That is, a lot of these terms are shifted a bit in UTOK, but they have generalized meanings. Psyche in particular develops a specific meaning in relationship to UTOK. Let me explain by starting with the general term. So very often, psyche can essentially mean the totality of one's mind or the topic of psychology. We can go back in history and identify the word in relationship to Aristotle, which used the word psyche, synonymous with soul, and it was essentially the functional form of living at the vegetative level, kind of like plants, at the animal level or sensory motor level, and at the rational person level. We can see that in relationship to life, mind, culture on the tree of knowledge. And when we think then about psychology, isn't it about the psyche? I want to argue that not exactly. In fact, I just argued in the previous video that psychology was about the science of mental behavior and human psychology about human mental behavior. The psyche is different, and the reason is because the frame of the psyche is fundamentally different than the frame of science. What do I mean by that? Well, in my previous video, I talked about the way psychology, the way I'm using it, should be defined in relationship to the evolution of modern empirical natural science. Well, what happened with modern empirical natural science? It was a new system of knowing. What they did, in essence, was, famously got up out of their armchairs and started measuring things. And they translated observable events into quantitative changes that could then be observed by any trained observer. This is an unbelievably important move because what it means is anyone can now observe. And what do they observe? They observe entities and changes that are then quantified and modeled. So an observation of an entity and change, in other words, behavior, becomes the fundamental model of modern empirical natural science. And what they're trying to do with modern empirical natural science is identify the domain of interest and develop first descriptions and then generalized explanations about the generative mechanisms that give rise to actual events that then we can empirically observe. Now, why is this important? Think about what you can see from the vantage point of an intersubjective observer. It's anything you could see with like a camera or a scale or a measurement. So we can see behavior in relationship to this, but I want to now define the psyche in relationship to that perspective on the world that is the unique, individual, particular, qualitative experience of being from the inside out. Now let me ask you, can a camera observe that? And the answer is no. Indeed, early in the scientific enterprise, this was pretty clearly observed in relationship to, there seem to be these particular qualities out in the world that we can actually see with the scientific method, like mass, we can see force impact, we can see lots of other things. But then there are other things, these secondary qualities that actually live in our minds but can't really be observed. And indeed, the empiricists divided the world into primary and secondary qualities. We get the word qualia from this, and it's this division that's really key to understand. What UTOK identifies in that is that as we identify both qualia and the specific, unique, particular, idiographic place of the individual that's happening in the now, we have a totally different epistemological frame for science. Think about it this way. If I were to say, hey, I had this experience of my own subjective preference. It only happened once. It's not reliable. You can't really test it out. It's happened in my own subjectivity. Would you say that's scientific? And of course, the answer is that's actually the opposite of scientific language. And that's precisely the point. Would we say it didn't happen? Of course not. Science isn't about everything. Science fundamentally is about developing generalizable laws of general mechanisms that afford us a model for explaining the unfolding of behavior at various levels and dimensions. Psyche is fundamentally different. Psyche is each of our unique, particular place in the world. And what I want to do is I want to argue that science split an understanding of behavior from the understanding of psyche. That was really good for understanding certain things, especially matter and motion. However, as we got up the scale and got into mind, we got into all sorts of confusions. Some of those had to do with, well, how does mental behavior emerge? A lot of it, though, had to do with the epistemology of science versus the epistemology of qualitative knowing. What I want to say is unique, idiographic, particular, qualitative knowing, that's the psyche. And it's actually known through first-person, non-deductive, inductive experience, but just fundamental awareness of being. I call that the ontic epistemic realization of being. And it's true within itself. It's a fundamentally different kind of epistemology than science. What we need are systems that reconcile and cohere. What UTOK does is it gives us the tree of knowledge system to map out the various behaviors that we can see scientifically as they unfold and develop causal explanatory frameworks for their occurrence. The psyche is different. And in UTOK, what we have is the I-quad coin. Now, what this represents is each of our unique idiographic human identity function from the inside. And what we can do with it is specify that there are particular epistemic frames that exist in the world that are different than science. That's totally okay. A coherent vision of knowledge will be able to marry the different epistemic frames and place them in proper relation. And that's actually what UTOK fundamentally is about. It's about specifying the science of psychology and placing it in proper relation with the psyche, ultimately oriented towards wisdom.